Hi, everybody. We are here with the third in a three-part series on Plato's Apology. In that dialogue, Plato recounts the trial of Socrates, the Athenian philosopher in the city of Athens in 399 BCE. If you haven't yet looked at the two earlier installments, I would encourage you to take a look. Here we're going to pick it up with his conviction, look at how Socrates responds to that conviction, and also look at a relevant passage from the Phaedo, which describes Socrates actually drinking the hemlock and thus ending his life. So let's get into it. All right, so I think I've got the slides queued up here. Let's hop over to them. We've got Socrates, man of the hour, man we are discussing in this series. I say again, as I have in the previous installments, this is a non-technical introduction. We're not looking at the Greek, we're not engaging with scholarly sources, and in fact, we're dealing with an abridged version of the text. The goal is to animate the figure of Socrates, to understand this figure, and maybe to lay a basis, at least a foundation, for assessing what relevance he has for us today. I would submit to you that it is extensive. Socrates is depicted here in his death. I continue to repeat our little spoiler. Yes, he does die. He is sentenced to death, and he accepts that conviction by the drinking of a poison called hemlock. I've also commented in previous installments, in both of them, that this is one in a set of four dialogues that are often taken together. To repeat briefly, in case you haven't seen the other ones, the Euthyphro takes place immediately before the trial. The Apology is the trial. The Crito takes place immediately after, where Socrates' friends try to convince him to leave the city of Athens and escape the penalty of execution. And the Phaedo portrays that actual moment of Socrates' death and includes a discussion on the immortality of the soul. We are dealing here, of course, with the Apology. The abridged version that we're working with has 10 parts. As I have said previously, we looked in for part 1 at sections 1 through 3, part 2 at sections 4 through 6. We're picking it up here with sections 7 through 10, and 10 is about a paragraph in length. Socrates is convicted and asked to propose his own penalty. This is fun, you'll like this. Socrates is condemned to death, and Socrates argues that death is actually a good. Remarkable. And then Socrates concludes in that very brief final section. Here's our little structure. We got the numbers of those sections running up along the top of the screen, and then we've got the heading that we're dealing with immediately below that. On the slide itself, we have in italics my comment, followed by a quotation from the text. Socrates is convicted and asked to propose his penalty. I'll tell you, this is one of my favorite parts of the dialogue. I mean, the chutzpah of Socrates here. Socrates is convicted, I say here on the slide. Socrates is convicted and death is proposed. Instead, he proposes free meals for life. He says, Socrates, Meletus proposes death as the penalty. What shall I propose in response? Because convicted were allowed to propose their own penalty in an Athenian court of justice. I should propose what I deserve. What should I pay or receive? No doubt it should be something good if I am to get what I deserve. I can think of no better reward, Athenians, than free meals in the Prytaneum for the rest of his life. And Prytaneum is the city hall of Athens. And I'll just hop on to the next slide here. This is an image yielded by our friends at Google of the Prytaneum as it appears today in its ruined state. So Socrates is expending resources, his time and energy, in, as we saw in the previous installment, helping the citizens of Athens to examine their lives. Okay, he's doing something good, therefore he should receive something good. Now you think about how this is going to be received by his accusers. Holy moly! Uh, they want to execute him, and he's proposing free meals for the rest of his life. I think what a mensch! I love this guy. Okay, they don't take well to the free meals thing. And Socrates is, section 7 here, convicted. Um, uh, I guess it's the same section. Anyway, I say the following. Socrates mentions some other penalties, a fine, prison, or exile, but would exile actually be any better? Let's take a look at the passage and then we'll comment on this. Perhaps I should suggest exile as a penalty instead of death. But if I were to do so, I would be blinded by the love of life. Interesting, we'll come back to that. How could I consider that when even you, my fellow citizens, cannot stand my questions and conversations? If you have found them so objectionable that you wish to silence me, would other people tolerate me? No, Athenians, that's not likely. Socrates has won enemies in Athens. He will win enemies anywhere he goes. Philosophy wins enemies everywhere it goes, and it is criticized in much the same way across the last 2,500 years or so. Uh, I think this is very interesting here. I would be blinded by the love of life. I mean, should we not love life? I mean, I suppose we should. Socrates' suggestion here, and one reason why I think he is regarded rightly as such a foundational figure in this intellectual tradition, is there is something higher than the love of life. Yes, love your life. I mean, he's married, he has 3 kids, he seems to enjoy his life. He's not morose, but he loves truth and justice and philosophy, wisdom, above his natural life, his physical life, so that they can end his life, but he can nonetheless stand up for something that is higher than his life, and this will, as I used a cliche in the last installment, ring through the ages, right? Anytime a person is willing to stand up to something, even though at the risk of their life, they're following the same model here that we see provided, I would submit, by Socrates. I say, in the now well-known phrase, Socrates says, the unexamined life is not worth living. This is as close to a title track as we come. This is certainly the most quoted line in the dialogue, and perhaps the most, or certainly among the most quoted lines in the history of philosophy. Let's see exactly what Socrates says, and I'll comment on it briefly. If I say that the unexamined life is not worth living, and that the greatest good for a human being is daily to converse about virtue and all the other topics about which you hear me examining myself and others, you are not likely to believe me. Yeah, what I say is true, even if it is hard to persuade you. Right? So, okay, a difference between truth and persuasion, that's itself interesting, but let's take a look at that singular line. The unexamined life is not worth living. This really follows from what he just said about the love of life, right? I mean, if you are told that you may continue to live, you may not speak freely, you may not make your own decisions, you're just going to kind of follow the crowd and just Netflix your way, through your remaining years. Would you choose to do that? This is the same question that comes up in a movie like The Matrix, which is a kind of unending source of illustrations for this kind of discussion. Is it worth living in the Matrix? Right? Is it worth being plugged into the system and having this kind of eternal peace in a certain way? You're happy. You're provided with everything you need. Once you see that you're plugged into the matrix, can you bring yourself to stay plugged in? Socrates is saying you shouldn't be able to. No, because living in the matrix when you know it is the matrix is not a life worth living, right? Only when you're examining your life and following with courage the findings of your examinations, are you living a worthwhile life? Okay, now we're moving on. Socrates is condemned to death. We all saw this coming. Socrates' reputation for wisdom, true or not, will make Athens look foolish for killing him, says Socrates. So he's been informed of the conviction. What does he say? Let's take a look at the passage. So, you have voted to condemn me to death. Men of Athens, you won't gain much time in return for the bad name you will get from those who wish to malign the city. They will say that you killed Socrates, a wise man, for they will call me wise when they want to reproach you, even though I am not wise. So interesting here. We're in a space of kind of hearsay and accusation. Right? Lots of other city-states would like to malign Athens, would like to make Athens look bad. And certainly we can see examples today of countries trying to demoralize or criticize the culture of other countries. No different here. And what the execution of Socrates will do, he's saying, I mean, even though he is not wise in the sense that they are going to allege, it's going to bring a bad result upon the city because it's going to be seen as a foolish action. Same topic, I say, convicted not due to a deficiency of words or reasons, but a refusal to pander to the crowd. So Socrates is here addressing the question, well, I, Socrates, hold that these charges are absurd, that they are narrowly motivated by the interests of Meletus, Anytus, and Lycon, his accusers, as well as others who supported the accusations against him. So why, then, was he convicted, right? Wouldn't it be the case that a crowd provided with true evidence, as Socrates understands himself to have provided, wouldn't that crowd kind of crowdsource, like the truth would come out? Well, he says the following as a means to account for this: the deficiency that led to my conviction was certainly not one of words. Rather, I did not have the boldness, the impudence, or the inclination to address you as you would have liked, weeping and wailing and lamenting, saying and doing the kind of things that you customarily hear from others. Those things, as I said, are unworthy of me. We saw that in the previous installment. I do not regret the way I have defended myself. I would rather die having spoken in my way than speak your way and live. If Socrates had appealed to the vanity of the jury, if he had what is it, wept and wailed and lamented, right? If he had begged for pity, then yeah, maybe he would have been acquitted. But would that have been worthwhile? Socrates' answer is no. Better to simply state the facts, and by accepting the unjust penalty for your statement of those facts, you expose, as we saw in the previous slide, the injustice of those who are accusing you. Here we have an interesting case of silencing those with whom we disagree. Certainly something that's much talked about in our culture today in the past few years in various ways. Socrates' suggestion is that, as I say here on the slide, you can't avoid accounting for your life by silencing people who demand that you do so. Censorship and the silencing of others who are regarded as, I don't know, do we say Overton window still? Is that a 2023 thing? Those who disagree, it simply will not prove to be effective. And Socrates here offers a prediction of what will come to pass. He says the following: now, to you who have condemned me, I offer this prophecy. You kill me because you want to escape the accuser and avoid accounting for your lives. But things will not be as you expect. There will be more accusers than there are now, and because they are younger, they will be more severe with you and they will offend you more. If you think that by killing people you can avoid facing those who would censure your lives, you are mistaken. The truth will out. If you are in fact pretending to knowledge you do not have, if you are in fact on poor foundation in terms of your authority, that will be revealed. And if not by Socrates, who is going to be dead, then by a younger generation and by others to come later. Anyone who carries this, so to speak, torch of the Socratic method of examining your life and pressing others to do the same. It's an interesting case. This is section 9. As we say, section 10 is quite short. Death seems either to be unconsciousness, Socrates says in effect, or else migration to some new place. And neither of those things is so bad. So Socrates here is going to give some arguments to make certainly what looks like a pretty bad outcome look okay. What does he say? There is reason to hope that death is something good. There are two possibilities. Either death is a state of nothingness and utter unconsciousness, or, as some people say, a change and a migration of the soul from this world to another. If it is the former, unconsciousness, I say that to die is a gain, because then eternity is only like a single night. But if it's the latter, migration to another place, and all the dead are there, as people say, well, what good can be greater than that? He can converse with all of the great minds of history. He can see deceased relatives. He can be in the company of people he loves for, well, we might say eternity. In either case, Socrates is saying, you know, this charge of death, this penalty of death, is not the unmitigated negative that it may seem to be. My comment here, even if his judges actually did no harm, they intended to do harm, and that is blameworthy. So, okay, he accepts this argument that, yeah, maybe death isn't so bad, but that does not exonerate the people who voted to convict him. Because even if in actuality they're not harming him, like death is not such a bad thing as we thought, still, they had malice in their action. They intended to do him harm. Passage. Therefore, judges, be cheerful about death. Know this to be true. Nothing evil can happen to a good person, either in life or after death. Such people are not neglected by the gods. For this reason, I am not angry with those who accused or condemned me. They have done me no harm, though neither group intended to do me any good, and for this I may gently blame them. I like that translation. I don't know exactly what the Greek is there, but I like this translation. I may gently blame them. That malice, that desire to do harm, even if it doesn't do harm, is itself blameworthy. We have our last one here, and then we're going to take a look at the passage in the Phaedo where Socrates actually does drink the hemlock. On this one here, Socrates concludes, this is section 10 of our abridgment. Socrates wishes for his sons. Socrates' wishes, is plural, for his sons. What he wants people to do for his sons. Punish them. His sons should care for virtue and they should not be pretentious. I love how he puts it here. Let's take a look at it. I have one favor to ask. When my sons are grown up, I would ask you, my friends, to punish them. I ask you to trouble them, as I have troubled you. If they seem to care about wealth or anything else more than virtue, or if they pretend to be something when they're really nothing, then scold them, as I have scolded you, for not caring about that for which they ought to care, and thinking that they are something when they are really nothing. So don't be nice to my sons. Don't yes man my sons. Don't give my sons things. Right? Give them perhaps the favor of your examination of their lives. So Socrates is here, even in the case of his own family, calling for, let's call it, the practice of philosophy. Philosophy as a way of life, as we like to say after the title of Pierre Hadot's book. This is his vision. Okay, so let's move into a more kind of dramatic mode here, just for the remaining minutes of this recording. We've seen this picture already, Socrates drinking the hemlock. I also found on these interwebs of ours the following image, objects from the area of this jail where an execution would have been carried out. And these are claimed by the poster to be good examples of the kind of vessel that Socrates would have been given and in which the poison would have been distributed to him. So this is no longer the trial of Socrates. This is now the death of Socrates. We're just going to take a look at this passage, and I'll comment a bit briefly as we go, but pretty much it's just reading through the narrative. So place yourself, if you would, in the scene. Go, said Socrates, and do as I say. Crito, when he heard this, signaled with a nod to the boy servant who was standing nearby, and the servant went in, remaining for some time, and then came out with the man who was going to administer the poison. He was carrying a cup that contained it, ground into the drink. When Socrates saw the man, he said, "You, my good man, since you are experienced in these matters, should tell me what needs to be done." A couple comments. First of all, Socrates initiates the exchange. That's significant. He's not a passive character just submitting himself, right? He says, "Go and do as I say. Go and get the guy with the poison, please," right? In Crito, he's the guy who tried to convince him to escape. He initiates that. And finally here, "You, my good man, since you're experienced, tell me what needs to be done." I mean, even at the very end, he's inquiring. He wants to understand how the poison works. He wants to take the poison right. What a remarkable thing. The man answered, so this is the executioner, the guy with the poison. "You need to drink it, that's all. Then walk around until you feel a heaviness in your legs. Then lie down. This way the poison will do its thing." While the man was saying this, he handed the cup to Socrates, and Socrates took it in a cheerful way, not flinching or getting pale or grimacing. Then, looking at the man from beneath his brows like a bull, that was the way he used to look at people, he said, "What do you say about my pouring a libation out of this cup to someone? Is it allowed or not?" Interesting. So a libation here would be pouring a small amount of the liquid out onto the ground to honor a person. Again, the man answered, "What we grind is measured out, Socrates, as the right dose for drinking." "I understand," he said, "but surely it is allowed and even proper to pray to the gods, so that my transfer of dwelling from this world to that world should be fortunate. So that is the way I, too, am now praying for. Let it be this way." And while he was saying this, he took the cup to his lips, and quite readily and cheerfully he drank down the whole dose. So here's Socrates in the moment of being executed for impiety, expressing concern about piety. Up to this point, most of us, that is other people in the room, friends of Socrates, had been able to control fairly well our urge to let our tears flow. But now, when we saw him drinking the poison and then saw him finish the drink, we could no longer hold back. Seeing this, them crying, Socrates said, "What are you all doing? I am so surprised at you. You see, I have heard that a man should come to his end in a way that calls for measured speaking. So you must have composure, and you must endure." When we heard that, we were ashamed and held back our tears. So there's a kind of measured, the term used here, balanced approach. Socrates, even here in his moment of death, is not letting emotion and, as he used the term earlier, pandering, play in to his death. He, meanwhile, Socrates, was walking around until, as he said, his legs began to get heavy, and then he lay on his back. That is what the man had told him to do. Then that same man, who had given him the poison, took hold of him, now and then checking on his feet and legs. And after a while he pressed his foot hard and asked him if he could feel it, Socrates. And Socrates said that he could not. And then the man pressed his shins and so on, moving further up, thus demonstrating for us that Socrates was cold and stiff. Then Socrates took hold of his own feet and legs, saying that when the poison reaches his heart, he will be gone. So Socrates is, as it suggests here, as he said, saying that, he's himself commenting on the progress of the poison as it overtakes his body. Socrates was beginning to get cold around the abdomen now, stomach. Then he uncovered his face, for he had covered himself up, and said, this was the last thing he uttered, last words of Socrates, "Crito, I owe the sacrifice of a rooster to Asclepius. Will you pay that debt and not neglect to do so?" "I will make it so," said Crito. "And tell me, is there anything else?" When Crito asked this question, no answer came back. In a short while, he, Socrates, stirred. Then the man uncovered his face. His eyes were set in a dead stare. Seeing this, Crito closed his mouth and his eyes. Last words of Socrates. Crito, I owe the sacrifice of a rooster to Asclepius. Will you pay that debt and not neglect to do so? Setting one's affairs in order, and certainly I think scholars have spent a lot of time discussing what might be the case with these last words, but they're so precise, at least to suggest to me that they are accurate. Somebody would have no apparent reason to make up such last words as those. Such was the end of our comrade, and we may say about him that he was in his time the best of all men we ever encountered, and the most intelligent and the most just. And so we have, up in here, and so we have the death of Socrates, a measured, a balanced taking of this poison. I hope you've enjoyed this series. I've enjoyed very much exploring this dialogue, the apology, with you, written by Plato some years after the trial that we have reason to believe that he was present at. I think his name is even mentioned. Um, Please look for more content such as this on the channel, and please reflect on the life of Socrates. He is indeed, I would submit to you, a model for our time.